If you've come across the Buddho system, one of the first questions that comes up is simple. Where does it actually come from? And the honest answer is, we don't have a fully documented history for the Buddho. But that doesn't mean there's no structure to it. It means you have to separate three things very clearly. What is taught, what can be verified, and what is still being researched. If you don't separate those, everything gets mixed together and the whole conversation becomes really confusing. So let's start with what is actually taught. Within the Buddho system, there are a number of origin accounts that are repeated consistently. You'll hear that Mikao Usui, the founder of the Reiki system, practiced Buddho during his retreat on Mount Kurama. You'll hear that Buddho is connected to the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara and that it represents a deeper layer of Buddhist practice. You'll often hear that the system was transmitted across India, Tibet, China and Japan before appearing in its current form as we know it in the West today. And you may also hear that Seiji Takamori, the Japanese monk who passed on the Buddho teachings to the Reiki Jin Kei Do lineage head Dr. Ranga Premaratna, received training connected to older traditions, sometimes described in terms of study or institutional links in India. These aren't fringe ideas. They're central to how many practitioners and teachers understand the system. So the question is not whether these claims exist. The question is what sits behind them. Now, let's look at what actually can be verified. The clearest point of reference is the modern transmission of the system. Buddho, as it is practiced today, can be traced through the Reiki Jin Kei Do lineage, particularly through Seiji Takamori and his student, Dr. Ranga Premaratna, and then onwards down through Ranga's students and their students, etc., to the current day. This part of the history sits within living memory. It's being passed from teacher to student, and people can trace that transmission through direct teaching relationships. Even here, though, the picture isn't completely fixed. There are inconsistencies in early accounts. Details about how the system was presented or structured don't always line up. For example, many people say that there is no photograph of Seiji Takamori, but at least one early student reports being shown a photograph during their training in the United States. Now, that doesn't resolve the issue, but it tells you something important. Even recent history relies partly on recollection rather than formal documentation. Beyond that point, the evidence stops. There is currently no independently verified body of historical documentation that establishes Buddho as a defined system within recognized Buddhist traditions. No major Buddhist school records it as a lineage, and there is no independently verified documentation confirming that Mikao Usui practiced Buddho as a defined system. That doesn't mean the claims are false. It means they are not yet supported by independently verified historical records. Now let's take one of the most common claims, the idea that Usui practiced Buddho on Mount Kurama. Within the system, this follows a clear internal logic. Mount Kurama is associated with the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. Buddho, the central meditation practice of the system, centers on the cultivation and embodiment of Avalokiteshvara, and Reiki is understood within this framework to reflect similar principles. So the conclusion is drawn that what Usui practiced corresponds to, or in fact was, the Buddho meditation. That reasoning is absolutely internally consistent, but there are no historical documents or contemporary records that identify Usui's practice on Mount Kurama as Buddho. So from a historical perspective, this sits within lineage teaching rather than confirmed record. The same applies to the idea of transmission across India, Tibet, China and Japan. This kind of narrative mirrors how many established traditions describe their development. it provides a sense of continuity and certainly depth. But at present, there are no independently verifiable records that trace Buddho as a defined system along that path. Research within the lineage is ongoing, of course, and some elements point towards possible connections, but the work is absolutely not complete at this point. The same applies to claims about Seiji Takamori's training. Some accounts describe links to older traditions, including references to study in India. At present, there are no independently verified records that confirm those details. So again, this sits within lineage teaching and ongoing research. Now, one part of the system that is not in question is its connection to Avalokiteshvara. This is explicit within the teachings. It appears directly in multiple aspects of the system, and the structure of the practices reflects that influence very clearly. What remains under investigation is how that connection sits historically within recognized Buddhist lineages, not whether it exists within Buddho itself. So when you put all of this together, a clearer picture does start to form. Buddho, as it exists today, has been transmitted through a modern lineage. At the same time, it draws on multiple influences that are recognizable across Buddhist and related traditions. That's why parts of it feel familiar, while the system itself is not formally recognized as a distinct lineage. So what does all of this actually mean? If you're looking for a system with a fully documented and independently verified historical lineage, Buddho doesn't currently meet that standard. If you're looking at it as a system of practice, well, the question changes. What matters is whether it develops awareness, refines perception, and produces consistent results in direct experience. That's where its value is determined. And that leads to the only question that really matters at this point. Is the system and this lineage the right fit for you? Because history gives you context, but practice is what gives you the answer.